As Laura said, my name is Josh Williams, and we're going through a series on Take the Loss. We're going to be continuing that today. I'm going to first just start off by sharing a story with you. A few years ago, one of my friends, Rich, who was graduating from Yale Law School at the time, wanted to talk. It was one of his last kind of weeks in New Haven, and so he wanted to get together. He's someone that wouldn't call himself a follower of Jesus, but was having interesting spiritual conversations with me. We really liked talking about faith, talking about stuff in general. So it was a really kind of cool opportunity to be able to spend time with him before he left. So I went over to his apartment, and I thought, I was going to be talking to him, and all of a sudden I heard noise. It's like, okay, like obviously there's someone in there, so that's fine. But it wasn't just any kind of noise. It was the noise of a party. And it wasn't, music and laughter and dancing, but it was like the small chatter of a dinner party. You know the kind I'm talking about, where there's like some slight music in the background, and then just kind of like some talking here back and forth. It's like, wait, I thought we were gonna have like a one-on-one get-together, but it looks like I got invited to this dinner party, and it was like 10 p.m. It was late, and I was already, I was talking to you. I was like, I don't know if I can go out this late. It's like kind of, I don't know how I'm gonna, I'm tired. But now it's a dinner party. And this guy, he was about to graduate from Yale Law School. So I knew it wasn't just any kind of dinner party, but it's a dinner party with lawyers or soon-to-be lawyers. And even though I'm married to one of those, I am not one of those myself. And so I opened the door and kind of saw the scene, and I was like almost gonna do like a spin move to like confirm and then be like, if it's like what I thought, just like, and I'm out of there. But I decided to stay, even though I kind of thought I knew how this was going to go. You see, if you have not been to a party with law school students, been around lawyers, or I think it might be worse with law school students, they talk a lot about kind of what they're into, what they're about, maybe who they want to network with. And so when they're looking at you and say, like, Josh, what do you do? And I say, I'm a pastor, you can kind of see like the eyes kind of widen, like, ooh, I don't know how to interact with this. And also just like the face drop a little bit, because like they're not probably going to want to do an internship with the firm of Elm City Vineyard or just the church of Elm City Vineyard. It's kind of a less prestigious thing. And so we kind of make our way through the conversation, and I'm thinking, like, what do I do? Like, do I like kind of talk up what I'm doing with the church? Do I just kind of feel bad about myself, which is kind of like what's happening like normally, and just kind of, do I just sit in that? Where do I go from here in these conversations? And part of it was just feeling awkward. Just feeling like I didn't really know what to say, didn't really know what to do, and I wasn't really getting the chance to talk to my friend, which is what I thought I was doing in the first place. And I realized I was focusing on kind of how I was coming across. I was focusing on my reputation, and that's kind of what the environment was set up for. That's part of what people were doing at that dinner party, kind of sharing credentials back and forth. And I was just like, yeah, like I'm a pastor. Let's talk about that maybe? And that was really like the night. I had actually a cool moment with my friend, and that was good. But as I was driving back, I was like, that was just like a weird gathering. And I felt really self-conscious about how I was coming across, what I was saying about what I did, how I felt about that. Maybe you've been in a gathering like that, where you've been very conscious of how you've come across. You've been very conscious of what you do, what other people think of what you do, felt insecurity, felt anxiety, and even an internal wrestling. Well, that's, I think, all because we care about what people think about us. Like, that's something we care about, something we deal with. And I think a lot of that's normal. It's like good to actually kind of care what people think about you. If I just walked up and like at Lucretia's face and did something crazy, like it's probably good that I'm like not doing that all the time, because like she doesn't want to kind of see me as a crazy person. I don't want to be a crazy person. But at the same time, we focus on these things a little bit too much. I was focusing just a bit too much on how I was coming across and what others were thinking of me. And maybe you find yourself to be in a similar room doing the exact same thing. Just like money last week, with our reputation, we need to take the loss. And taking the loss is the process of losing, the process of sacrifice, of dying in some kind of way, even if it's just dying to ourselves, to make room for a kind of gain. Maybe it's a gain that we'll experience in our lives, and maybe it's a gain, as Scripture says, that we'll experience in heaven. In Jesus' word, unless a seed dies, it remains just a single seed. But if it dies, then it can bear much fruit. And we can see this in our lives. We can see this with all parts of it, whether it's money like we talked about last week, or reputation we're going to talk about this week. To give up control of a reputation, it demonstrates that we're willing to lower ourselves. We're willing to posture ourselves with humility. And also demonstrates trust in God, that God himself can be the one to make connections. God can be the one to give us some kind of certainty or standing with others. And we don't have to hustle. We don't have to practice political gamesmanship in our communities. And we don't have to toil. It's not simply hard work, but toil, to work hard to the point of being tired, of not being yourself. And I think that promise, that if we give our reputation to God, if we take the loss in it, that we can see a heavenly gain, that's an incredible promise in a city like ours, where a lot of people born and raised in New Haven actually want to leave, want to hustle, want to work hard so they can get out of here. They can get out of New Haven. That's the story of a lot of people. If you talk to, like, I'm trying to do something so I don't have to be here any longer. Not everyone, but a good majority of people. And even for folks who come to New Haven for some kind of opportunity, whether it's school or whether it's a job, to make a story for themselves, to make a name for themselves, and then to head out for something better. All of this leads to a reputation rat race, where we ruin the gift of good work with toil, we tarnish friendships through comparison and jealousy, and we resist rest for worry, for busyness, for poor health. When we try to earn a reputation, to manicure it to our desired audiences, we play with fire, because this is an all-consuming task, and we're set up to lose. There's always going to be something better. There's always going to be someone better, something brighter to tempt us and to make us feel like we're not enough. Like whatever we've done, no matter how hard it's taken us to get there, it still isn't enough. Jesus has a different way forward on reputation. Maybe you've guessed that. It's a stranger path, a much stranger path for making our way through this world of reputation. And this way is rather simple. Don't fight for honor. Don't fight for a great reputation, but instead wait for honor from a place of humility, perhaps the lowest place, and invite others who can't repay you to join in that pursuit. So don't fight for honor. Don't try to earn it yourself, but wait for it. And as you wait, even gather with people who actually won't help you in your pursuit of honor, but just wait together. That's Jesus' wisdom, and we'll see more of that as we go into the scripture for today. But I think for us to actually be open to this, we need the Spirit of God, because this isn't something natural. This isn't something we would come up with ourselves. It doesn't seem like it should work. But with God, all things are possible. And with God, this way is actually supposed to be good for us, even better for us than maybe the way that we're going about this ourselves. So let's pray together for the Spirit of God to be here, for the Spirit to be in our midst, to be active in us, to be guiding us with how we deal with our reputation and giving us wisdom and courage to actually follow through. So join me as we pray. God, I thank you for your Spirit. I trust that your Spirit is here. And Lord, I ask for your Spirit to be present, giving us wisdom, giving us your heavenly perspective. God, we say that we want that we need that, and that we desire that from you. God, would you meet us each where we are, no matter what our experience has been with you for our lives and even for this past week. We ask that we would be open to hear from you. God, we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. So throughout Jesus' ministry, he had a lot of time to interact with people who cared a lot about reputation. Probably the most notable group of that was the Pharisees, the spiritual and religious elite of Jesus' day. They cared a lot about how they came across, and they certainly really cared about others, the ways that they presented themselves. And in the Gospel of Luke, an account of Jesus' life, we see an example of this in chapter 14. Jesus is over at the house of a leader of the spiritual elite, and Jesus has just healed someone on the Sabbath, which is a no-no. So Jesus already did that. He's already breaking the party rules, already breaking, the guest rules. And you'd think that maybe Jesus would lay low after that. Just like, okay, I already healed someone on the Sabbath. They're kind of like silent. They're in awe. They might be confused. Maybe I'll just kind of just eat the cheese and crackers. But Jesus doesn't do that. Jesus actually amps up the situation by telling a very relevant parable for, guess what? People who are at a dinner party, much like their guests are. So Jesus is actually speaking about a situation that is playing out kind of right before their very eyes. When Jesus noticed how the guests chose the places of honor, he told them a parable. When you are invited by someone to a wedding banquet, do not sit down at the place of honor, in case someone more distinguished than you has been invited by your host. And the host who invited both of you may come and say to you, give this person your place. And then in disgrace, you would start to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and sit down at the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, friend, move up higher. Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at the table with you. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. Sorry, I'm almost trying not to laugh here, because just think about it. You're at a dinner party with Jesus. Then Jesus says, let me tell you a parable. Maybe you know something about these parables, that they're otherworldly and mysterious and deal with these different things that don't relate to your life. And then all of a sudden Jesus says, so you're at a dinner party and you've chosen seats and you're thinking, wait, I just did that. Jesus is just talking about what they did. So it's a parable, but it's almost like a thought experiment, and a thought experiment that you just acted out without knowing that Jesus was going to give a lesson on it. That's what is happening here. That's where people are finding themselves. Where did you sit? Why did you choose that seat? Jesus apparently has thoughts about that. Jesus apparently cares about that. I'm not sure if that's true in this space. You don't have to worry about where you sat today. You're a guest. You guys are fine. But Jesus is really invested in this question of where did you sit? And Jesus here is redefining the lowest place, and he's redefining the highest place. I think these two locales had a basic kind of set of values that were set in stone in the Pharisees' world. And I think it's pretty simple because it's, I think, similar to ours. The lowest place is bad. You don't want to be there. It's the lowest rung. Why would you choose that? Don't choose the lowest place. The lowest place is not good with not good people. Don't do it. And the highest place is what? It's the best. You want to be there. This place of honor is good. And the people who are there, they're good. High is good, low is bad. That's the value set, it seems, for the Pharisees. It's the value set of their day, and I'd argue for our day too. But what does Jesus focus on? Does he actually focus on the high or the low? Well, Jesus seems to focus not on those static positions, but instead Jesus focuses on movement. Jesus focuses on where people are going, on where you're going, where you're headed. Not low or high, but where you're moving. Will you start high and then in disgrace have to move low because someone says, by the way, there's someone more important here and we need that seat. Yeah, the one you're sitting in, we need that one. Or will you start low and eventually be called into a place of honor to move high? No, come to the front. Yeah, you come. Be with us here. Which one is your trajectory? Where are you moving? That's the question that Jesus has. That's what he's really revealing in this parable. And through this, Jesus challenges a powerful paradigm that the high place is always the best place. And that those who sit in the high places are automatically valuable, they're automatically worthy, they're automatically good, and that the lowest place is, of course, to be avoided at all cost. Jesus is challenging that through this teaching. Jesus' society used to struggle to believe in the upside-down way of looking at the world. And I think we struggle with the same thing. We assume that CEOs, presidents, leaders of government or organizations, that somehow they're just automatically better, that they're good, that they've made it, that they're the ones we ought to be. And that people at the low rung of the ladder, they're not really worth our time. And even if we find ourselves there at the lower rung, we kind of still internalize this somehow and feel shame, feel bad for being at that lowest place. And we don't want to be there anymore. So Jesus' parable warns us about this and calls us to something countercultural. Jesus calls us to lowest place spirituality. To lowest place spirituality. Because he's redefining what that means. Instead of that being a place to avoid at all costs, Jesus is saying, no, actually start there. Start at the lowest place and see what I'll do. And as usual, Jesus' invitation operates on multiple levels. I'll share two that I see very plainly in this lowest place spirituality. And I'll call it the big picture and the small practice. We see Jesus actually bringing two different things to the forefront. The big picture is that God honors and lifts up those who intentionally choose the lowest place, who intentionally choose humility. God's redefining the lowest place from a place where you feel abandoned and lost and saying, no, when you start at the lowest place, God will honor you. When you choose it, when you seize it as your own, God will be with you and he'll lift you up. That's the big picture. But what's the small practice? The small practice is to actually take the lower seat. To when you're in a room, actually try this out. To actually go and find the seat that's not the best one and to go there. And occasionally to enjoy the reality that people do call you up. I think we're supposed to feel the cost of the lowest place, but also to enjoy when we're called up, to experience that place of honor. We can't necessarily promise that that's going to happen in each situation, but sometimes it does. And we feel both the cost, but the delight in what it means to join whatever is the highest place or the thing of honor, and to trust that you've received favor, even favor from God. And Jesus often pairs these small practices with the big picture to remake our life, to have us believe in the big picture, but enforce it through small practices, even ordinary practices that somehow make our lives be able to change. Last week we explored this with money. We talked about small practices like being generous, like tithing, like hospitality, and how that actually helps us live out this big picture that money doesn't control or possess us. That's a big picture, a big thing to believe, but God gives small practices to make it possible for us to exist in that world, to have hope for that world. They go together, small, everyday practices. Some people call these practices of spiritual formation or practices of discipleship. And it reinforces a big picture of the world that God's bringing, the kingdom of God. They go together. And I think this big picture, small practice for reputation is very similar. In order to not let the reputation rat race get the better of you, play the game of lowest place spirituality. Take the lowest seat. Wait for God to lift you up. And do that instead of exerting needless effort to curate, to maintain, to fight for your reputation. Now, we know that's exhausting work, and we've done that with something. Whether that's been your CV, whether it's been your social media profile, whether it's been what you've said to people, you've fought sometimes to maintain a certain image, and it's exhausting. Jesus says, give that up. Just take the lowest place and let me take over from here. That's really, really good news, because that work of cultivating, curating our reputation, it is exhausting work. And like I said before, no one wins. There's always something or someone better. So how does this work practically? Well, I think one example, it's just basically what the text's saying, is to really choose the lowest seat. It's when you're in a room, C, okay, what's it going to be this time? Is it going to be kind of a comfort level? There's a really cool chair, good chair, and you're going to choose something else? Hey, it's happened. I've done that. I've been there. Maybe it's that there's someone in the room you really want to talk to, or someone in the room that other people have shunned, other people have rejected, and you're going to go towards them. Maybe there's a celebrity, a famous person. You're if I only sat there, I'd have a shot of talking to them. Take the lowest seat, and then see what happens. I actually experienced this in a very small, very ordinary way yesterday. I was at a bachelor party, and I obviously know the groom, but I don't really know a lot of the other people. And so there was a long table. The groom was on one end, and I kind of said, well, I'm open to meeting new people, and I kind of think that's reserved for maybe friends or maybe family. I know that he had family in town, so I'm gonna just go the other side. And as I sat down on the other side, was ready to talk to new people, the groom said, no, come over here, come with me. And I think part of that was compassion. He knew I didn't know a lot of the other guys. They knew each other, so he was probably having pity on me. But it was exactly what we're talking about. He literally was no, come over here. And I just sat to his right. And that's actually what the text is talking about. In that day, it was a place of honor to be with the person who was throwing the party, to be with the person the party was for, to be at their left or their right. And so I took the lower seat, but then I felt that ushering in. And that felt amazing because I was yes, did everyone, I didn't say this, but like I was thinking, did everyone see that? It's okay for me to sit here, right? Like no one get mad. Like it was like that person that called me up to be like, oh, I'm this person's friend. Like Tina really loves me. She knows me well. Like, but that was what was going through my mind. I was like, yes, like I was like called into this place instead of just being like, I'm gonna presume it. And that feels really good. And I think that's actually an offer we have when we kind of try this out. So I really challenge you guys, like, do this. You don't have to do it downstairs at our dinner because that could get weird. Everyone's like trying to sit in the bad seats, everything. Don't worry about that. We can just, let's think about that. We can take tonight off, right? We'll start tomorrow or start like after the dinner, unless you really want to do it. But seriously, actually take like a moment to try this on. I found that it really does work. Both in feeling the cost of taking the lower seat. There was a time where I tried to do this and was just kind of in a cramped like hatchback, like just sitting like this. I was like kind of like, I don't know if this is what like spirituality is supposed to feel like. I think I'm just in pain, but like sometimes like spiritual lessons hurt and sometimes foolishness just hurts too. But like you can actually try this. Be wise, but try this out in an actual room, in a place. But I also think we know this goes beyond just a physical scenario. I think we know that seats and places of honor are more than just really that comfy chair or something else like that. It goes deeper. I think another challenge for this week is to do an inventory of places of honor. Maybe it's a certain award that you're longing for. Maybe it's a certain kind of status in your job, a change, like whether it's a promotion, whether that's tenure, whether it's being the senior person at your job. Maybe it's recognition among your friends or your family. Even just a compliment. I know for some people, like going home, like to your family, all you want is, I see you. You're doing a great job as a parent. Oh, your house, it looks perfectly manicured. We're just waiting for someone. Maybe it's a grandparent, maybe it's our parent to say that. It could be recognition for you. Maybe it's strategic provision that you're just longing for. If we could only do this thing as a family. If I could only make this mark. Sometimes those are our places of honor, not a seat. And I think Jesus would still say, take the lowest seat and then wait. Wait for me to lift you up. Wait for me to be the one that calls you forward. Not your toil, not your gifts of persuasion, not your manicured life, your presentation, but just the activity of God. Will we be willing to wait for God to move us forward, for God to lift us up? For God to be the one, not our own efforts, even our best ones. Lowest place spirituality does not look like scorning these places of honor. I don't think that's what's going on. Rather, it looks like being open-handed with them, being more concerned with our journey of getting there, instead of just seizing them for ourselves. And I think this is why Jesus is invested in his followers, starting in the lowest place, and through him making it to that place of honor. I've had the privilege of seeing this up close and personal. I've seen this in the life of my wife, Tina, when she was just my girlfriend and was making a hard call after deferring law school for a year. She got into a top law school but wasn't sure anymore if law school was what God was calling her to. She knew that it was a track that was acceptable, definitely to her parents who really wanted her to go, but she wasn't sure anymore if that was the call of God on her life. She was also considering joining me in being in New Haven while I was on my lowest journey path, lowest place path of wondering how an internship at ECV would turn into something that would be a career that would make money. Another story for another day, / you see some of how that worked out. But back to Tina. Tina was deciding what to do and how to move forward. And she actually made a really costly decision to decide not to go to law school without kind of another backup plan. And she did that mid-year, kind of with a lot of opportunities already falling through for her. She ended up working at Bruegger's Bagels right on Church Street. She had interviews with employers to kind of get a better job. Those same employers went to Bruegger's Bagels, saw her work there, were very confused. She ended up not getting those jobs. She was staying at random people's homes, including a dorm room. She was not a student anymore, but was staying in a student dorm room that did not have another bedroom, but somehow making that work. This is someone who was like taking the lowest seat out of a call. This sense of like, I want to make something else work than just my own best plans. And God met Tina where she was. She eventually became worship pastor in that time, wanting to give and invest in the local church. Wasn't a paid role, didn't help with her job situation, but it kind of gave her a purpose and a call forward. She had an internship that was lined up that was just for incoming law students. She was not one of those. She thought, should I lie and say I am? We kind of consulted as boyfriend, girlfriend. I was like, I don't think I can say to lie and still like be a good boyfriend, and then you might not want to marry me because I have bad character. So I'm just gonna say like, don't take that. Even though I'm like, how's it gonna work out for her to stay in New Haven? She eventually told the truth. Still got the internship at IRIS, Integrated Refugee Immigration Services. Was able to work there, and eventually applied to law school with a sense of what God was doing, with God's activity in mind, and got in, was able to stay in New Haven, to be together. Don't need to tell you all of the personal story about us and that we got married, which was cool. But then one of the things I love about the story is, and this again is just kind of I think God's cherry on top, and not something that's guaranteed, not provision. It's not even something that's going to be Tina's future forever maybe. But she ended up working at a law firm that met right across from Brugger's Bagels. So she was on one corner in one season and on the other corner in the other, representing two very different paths, but again, being open-handed to both of them. And I really love that story because it really is true that choosing the lowest seat, again, not just a seat in the room, but maybe a real career option, it does have cost. And like those costs were felt. Like I remember those conversations after days of just working at Burgers and Bagels, being like, what am I doing in New Haven? And I was like feeling guilty because I'm like, I think part of the answer is me, but I can't say that right now. Really can't say that right now. Maybe not in, yeah, won't say anything more about that. But there's other things that were going on. God was at work. God was a part of Tina's story. And I feel like for us, when we take those chances, we take those risks to be in the lowest place, and when we choose that, we see God move on our behalf. Jesus actually cares about our choices in this way, and he's willing to back our choices up. He really is. But it's a question of trusting God, trusting him with our path, not just trusting our own hard work, not just trusting our gifts of persuasion, but actually trusting his movement in our lives, his activity in our lives. He asks us to choose the lowest seat actively, with humility and with expectation for God's presence and promise. But that's not it. Jesus kind of, again, kicks things up a notch, makes things just a little bit tougher, even a little bit more confusing. He doesn't just define lowest place spirituality by our own movement, by our own lives, but also who we're doing life with. If you know anything about Jesus, he doesn't just care about our path, but he cares about our path with others, our community. And we see Jesus really dig into that in this next part of the passage. When you take the lowest place, it can seem even more important than to have the right people in your life. Okay, if I'm going to work at Burgers Bagels, then I really need to have people in high places. If I'm going to take this lowest seat at my job, then I really need to know who has the positions and powers that are going to be able to get me my next one. If I'm going to do this in my family, then I really need to get on the good side of this person. It can seem like when we take the lowest place, that's when our connections, our networking might become even more important than ever. Because we feel weak, we feel maybe like we don't have a way forward, a way out. But Jesus doesn't follow that train of thought. He doesn't follow that logic. Jesus actually asks us to seek out folks who others don't want, and then to invite them to friendship and to fellowship, to invite those people into our family. And that's Jesus' next word at this dinner party. Again, you thought it was kind of an intense thing already. Now Jesus is going back to his dinner guest and speaking more. Jesus said also to the one who had invited him to the party, when you give a luncheon or a dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors, in case they may invite you in return, and you would be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, and you will be blessed, because they cannot repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. Words from Jesus, your dinner guest. Thanks for inviting me, but who you really should have invited is the poor, the lame, the cripple, the blind. Again, these cheese and crackers are really good, but just some tips for you for next time. Jesus is describing more than charity here. I think we can think about this just as charity. Oh, just buy a meal for them. They can't pay you back. But we've got to realize in the culture of Jesus' day, to have a meal with someone was a recognition of their humanity, but also a recognition that you wanted to be close to them, that you wanted to be intimate with them, friends and family. Sharing a meal was an intense act. Sometimes now we can just buy a meal to kind of maybe have someone go away. It's like, okay, you're asking me for money, I'll buy a meal, we're done. In this culture, meals were the start of beautiful things, beautiful relationships. There was actually an expectation that if you invited someone, that they would actually invite you back over. And this is part of where we got into a kind of wrong dinner club mentality here, right? Because if you invited someone that was really wealthy to your place, that meant the next week you were really eating nice, you were eating big. So you would want to invite those people so then you could go over their place. And even thinking about it, they invited Jesus. So what might they have been expecting from him? I don't think our text answers that question, but it's a really interesting one. Maybe it's part of a reason why Jesus is saying, actually, I'm going to give you some new tips. They might not involve me giving you a nice dinner, but maybe they can be more advice for your own. This is, again, dinner advice from Jesus, relationship advice from Jesus, community advice from Jesus. What about inviting people who can't offer anything back? These people were left out consistently of these self-serving, self-seeking dinner clubs. We can think that maybe we're very different from this culture. We're very different from the people that need Jesus' words. But let me ask you this question. When's the last time you invited someone over for dinner who couldn't pay that favor back? Was it this weekend? Was it this month? Was it in 2017? When did you have someone over for dinner that just couldn't repay that favor? A lot of times we can think we're very different than these characters in the story until we start asking ourselves some tough questions. And we realize we might be exactly the same and just in need of Jesus' words as the people in the text. And we have to realize that while the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind obviously represent those literal categories, there might be other people in your life, other people in our city, other people in our world that you don't think highly of that represent those categories in a different kind of way as well. Maybe it's people of a different political background than yours, people of a different ethnicity or an ethnicity that you have a hard time with. Maybe it's a neighbor or coworker or classmate that's shunned by others around you. Maybe you don't even have a problem with them, but the fact is they've been blackballed by other people who you do want to impress, who you do care about. What if these categories represent them too? Even though these folks might not be able to dole out culturally savvy points back to you, Jesus invites you to the lowest place by including them as an act of hospitality that will just be repaid in heaven, not in your own social world. So how are we doing with this? Do our parties and gatherings in ECV reflect this kind of pulling the outsider in? Have we found the lowest place to be a place of rest for us, a place of freedom, a place of trust? Remember, we don't have to work hard for this place. We don't have to manicure all these things in this place. Have we found it then to be a place of freedom for us? Do we buy Jesus' pitch that the humble really will be exalted, and those who exalt themselves will be humbled? Or we just treat that as kind of fancy spiritual language that we might sing once a week? We don't really believe when we look at the rich and powerful. We don't really believe when we look at the mirror. That we don't really believe when we look at the lives of the poor. Is that our relationship with that phrase of Jesus? Does our community and our church life together, does that reflect this lowest place spirituality? Are we kind to each other in this way? Are we thoughtful about one another in this way? Jesus wants us to live this everywhere, but it would be a shame if we didn't do that in the church. To start it in the church, to have this community be a model of this kind of witness, this kind of life together. So are we doing that here? Jesus really, really wants us to. He really has desires for us in this. He wants us to be weaned from a place of just desiring places of honor that lead us to play the reputation rat race. It's not something he has for us. Jesus wants to disrupt the way that we use people just for the purposes of networking, not to love them, not to truly see them, but just to get something from them. Jesus wants us to move from ignoring those who don't fit our profile, the usual people we hang out with, to connect with those who are different from us, even people that might be less seemingly useful to our projects, to our goals and grapplings with the place of honor that we desire. And a big takeaway from today is that Jesus is invested, yes, in moving us from a place of honor, from the lowest place to that place of honor. But there's something even more important going on here than just one of those moves that will happen in our lives. Because I think if we really do commit to this, it will happen. But there's something even more important, I think, going on today. Jesus wants us to receive more than an honor from the lowest place. He wants us to receive a right understanding of the world, a right understanding of his kingdom that is coming to transform everything. And I think we can see differently if we really trust this practice of Jesus. This is the loss Jesus is asking us to take, and the eventual gain is insight and revelation about the world and the way it works. This world that is to come, where there'll be poor and there'll be CEOs alike, spending eternity together as equals, and more than equals, friends and family. In this heavenly reality to come, reputation and esteem themselves are transformed forever. And through this practice, we get a glimpse of that. More than any individual place of honor will get, I think God cares about that perspective, that we understand that. And we live differently because we understand that. I think that's what's at the tip of our fingertips today. To get that right understanding, to think differently, to live differently, to take different steps and different actions. I really think God has that as a gift for us today. As we close, I just want to share some tips and ways forward as we think about how can we make this practical for our own life? How can we embody these things in our own life? And we'll use the same paradigm we've been using for the last few weeks, looking at obedience, following the commands of Jesus, humility, conforming to the character of Jesus, and spiritual risk, stepping out in the faith of Jesus. First, obedience, following the commands of Jesus. Some of you, I think, as I've talked today, have felt conviction, a sense that something you've been involved in is wrong, is not of God. Whether it's the burnt out way that you've been in the reputation rat race, or maybe ignoring folks who can't do something for you based on your limited perspective. And obedience simply looks like repenting, changing your mind and turning around, asking God for forgiveness and new hope for a different kind of life. It also looks like restitution, making amends with others where you've gone astray, even in ways that are tangible, ways that might be costly for you. Obedience looks like saying, yeah, that hasn't been what I've done, but it is what I want to do. God, would you forgive me? Give me a new start and help me make amends to show my remorse to real people that I want to care about more. That's what a step of obedience could look like for you today. There's humility, conforming to the character of Jesus and choosing the lowly place. It is costly and it does hurt. Lowering yourself is not easy if you've had a mean boss, a manipulative family member, if you've been seen as less because of your gender, the color of your skin, your age. You know how humbling and how costly it is to take the lower seat in those instances. It's different than just doing it in a regular way, right? There's a different kind of weight on it. I think it's important to talk about that because it's part of, I think, the call to humility. Oftentimes, doing something like being lowly there can seem like you're just reinforcing the very discrimination or very injustice that you faced or been forced to experience. But I want to just share 3 tips for dealing with this. The first is remember that you're taking the lowest seat. You're not settling for it. The posture of momentum, the posture of intentionality, and action pursuing God, for me, all of that makes or breaks the series. That you're seizing something for yourself, you're taking something for yourself in your pursuit of godliness through this action. I think otherwise you run the risk of being walked upon. And that's not true humility. That's not godliness. Humility is being exactly who you are, not more and not less. And 2 is to actually look for God's power to lift you up. Jesus does not say that people who start in the lowest place will end there. In fact, from the text, it says the exact opposite. But we need to actually be looking for Jesus' movement. We need to be aware that God will lift us up. We can't just stay static or paralyzed when we choose the lowest place, or just hang with people when others say that you are lowly. We've got to look and even expect divine movement in our story. We've got to expect that God will honor us, that God will lift us up. That makes a really difficult situation more possible, more bearable. And 3, this is a little tricky, but I think it's true. Waiting is not passive. Waiting is active. And it sometimes includes advocating for yourself and advocating for others. Jesus says don't automatically take the place of honor. Don't presume to do that with the place of honor. But he didn't say you can't wisely inquire about it. I think that's true. Sometimes you might need to ask a question. So no one's in that really comfortable seat? Can I go there? You know, especially if you've been denied that comfortable seat time and time and time again. I think it's okay to ask some questions, right? So this isn't just a muzzling of your mouth. You can ask questions, you can advocate for yourself. I think that's a part of how God moves. And I think, again, for those instances where it might be targeting, discrimination, all that stuff, you need to be able to do that, to ask about those things. And the last one is spiritual risk. And I think, honestly, we've laid out some opportunities to kind of practice this, and I think all of that's a spiritual risk for us. But some specific ones would just be to find 2 people. Maybe it's someone inside of the church, someone outside the church, someone who might not necessarily give you anything with your thinking about kind of your places of honor, whether that's a job that you want, whether that's tenure that you aspire to, whether that's the compliment from your family member, someone that's not really involved in that world, someone that couldn't give you that thing that you feel like you need. Just actually spend time with them. Be with them. Love them. Serve them. Be invested in someone or something where you're not going to get a dividend back into what you idolize or into what you care about. Be seemingly wasteful in the pursuit of a community that's not built on self-serving relationships, but it's actually built on mutual affection that comes just from being part of God's family, whether that's the church, whether that's just people in general, because we're all made in the image of God. Waste something on that, whether it's money, whether it's time, whether it's your energy. Be invested in something beyond yourself, in your own pursuits. I think if we take these invitations seriously, I really do think they'll transform our life. I really do. Jesus doesn't give this parable for no reason. And there's a reason why he gives the parable to the person doing the dinner party themselves, because he knows this is going to change how you do this next time. If I'm invited back, I'll see a change. Maybe that's a big if Jesus is invited back. But I think as we adopt these things too, we'll see our lives change as well. I'm going to invite the worship team to come back up. One thing that's great about Jesus' words on the lowest place is that all his words are backed up by Jesus' own actions. As God, Jesus left a very comfortable place, a very comfortable home in heaven, to go to the lowest place, a manger where he was a baby, wrapped in human skin, human flesh, born in mess to young parents, soon to be refugees under colonial occupation. It's pretty low. It's a pretty low place for Jesus to start. And as God, Jesus made friends who could not pay him anything back, not heavenly riches, and oftentimes not simple obedience, not humility, not spiritual risk, just timid and confused following, and eventually abandonment, eventually betrayal. And at the end of his life, Jesus made a decision to sacrifice everything to embrace the lowest place of all, a sacrificial death at our hands. And at communion, that's what we celebrate, that's what we remember. That Jesus dared to go to the lowest place on the cross and remain there, though he could have moved, though he could have escaped and gotten away at any second. At that lowest place, Jesus wasn't covered in his disgrace or shame, but actually took on our own. Then God changed his story. He intervened in his situation. He gave him new life, brought him to this resurrection. And we can do nothing to repay him. Absolutely nothing. But we can enjoy the banquet that he invites us to, despite our deep betrayal. We are the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame, in light of a resurrected Savior. That's who we are. Yet Jesus invites us to the table to take bread that represents his broken body, and invites us to take the cup representing his shed blood. And in that we celebrate this broken Messiah who will guide us to the lowest place and will lead us to a place of greater honor with him. The banquet table is now open and available for us. And this is the invitation for anyone who is a follower of Jesus, for anyone who wants to become a follower of Jesus, to experience this upside-down kingdom, this upside-down countercultural life. Jesus' invitation to us is come and feast. Let's take him on his invitation and be with him today as we worship, as we pray, as we're together in this place as a different kind of community. Let's join him.